scholars. We are back for video number 2 on our religious wars. It's going to be live. It's going to be unedited. It's going to be filled with some grammatical errors as usual, but we got to get rolling because this war and this explanation is going to take about 30 years. Okay? All right. So our 30 years war. These are pretty significant years that we have to understand, 1618 to 1648. That end of the 30 Years' War, this Peace of Westphalia that we are going to get to at the end of this presentation, that year 1648, that's going to be our first big turning point in AP European history. It signals the end of time period 1 and time period 2, and so we have to kind of understand, well, why is it this date, okay? Why 1648? Well, I think it really does come down to this 30 Years' War. To fully understand the 30 Years' War, let's go back and figure out or try to recall the key concepts that we are focused on. What are the bigger pictures here? So, key concept 1.23 talks a little bit, or first of all, key concept 1.2, remember, is religious pluralism challenge the concept of a unified Europe. Now, we are getting very specifically into key concept 3, which is focusing on these conflicts, aka wars. Conflicts among religious groups overlapped with political and economic competition within and among states. And I really think this 30 Years' War, we dabbled into it in those French wars. We saw how political motives and economic motives amongst those powerful families, how they manipulated religious gains or religious motives to meet their gains. But we're starting to see more political and economic motives as well. Well, the 30 Years' War, as we move through these stages, you will see how it dramatically shifts from religious motives to more political and economic. The Holy Roman Empire, the family, the group that we are going to be focused on are our Habsburgs. We'll talk a little bit about them here in a second. But the Habsburgs, especially within the 30 Years' War, tried to restore Catholic unity across Europe. And as we will see, they are unsuccessful. The 30 Years' War, the part that I really had you do most of your notes from the textbook reading, it does fall under key concept C, where we will see how they exploited religious conflicts to try to promote political and economic interests. So this is the bigger picture that we want to see. And so now, how does the 30 Years' War help us understand this bigger picture a little bit better? Okay. So very quickly, just going to do a little bit of kind of a sidestep, maybe set up that little contextualization. Not so we're going to not have a German meal. We're not going to set the table like we did in that last one. But I think it's kind of understand to make sure that you are aware of who the Habsburgs are. You've been reading their names from the last unit and into this unit. So, just to kind of give you a little bit of sense on where we're at. Remember, we focused on Ferdinand and Isabella early on, or you read a little bit about them, and they most famously took that gamble on Christopher Columbus and hit that whole new aspect of globalization, especially in the Americas. Well, Ferdinand and Isabella are the grandparents of Charles V. And you should note here, they have multiple children, right? The Habsburgs then come to control Spain because of the connection. You have Ferdinand and Isabella, and then you have within the Holy Roman Empire this Habsburg family. And so we have, through alliances or through marriage, we now have Habsburgs in the Spanish royalty. Okay, so Charles V, he's our guy that we met last week when we focused on that Martin Luther. Charles V, very young Holy Roman Emperor. He is the leader of the Holy Roman Empire, but at one point he also becomes the King of Spain, right? Because you can see, like, this family, I'm the King of Spain, but I'm also the Holy Roman Emperor. So this one family has these huge connections. Charles, towards the end of Charles V's reign, he starts having some medical problems. He abdicates. He gives up power. But he did it very politically motivated, right? He knew he had a brother that was ready to rule and a son. So he splits the Habsburgs into the Spanish Habsburgs and our Austrian, or sometimes you'll hear me refer to them as the German Habsburgs. Philip II, his son, becomes the King of Spain, and his brother Ferdinand becomes the Holy Roman Emperor. So the Habsburgs, remember, they are they're one family, okay? Pretty heavily Catholic. Charles V is the one that was really plagued by Martin Luther and this whole beginning of the Protestant Reformation. So we are going to see the relatives of Ferdinand trying to restore that Catholic unity, okay? Philip II, you read a little bit about him in your readings for this week as well. Philip II, what you should know about him is ultra Catholic. He really feels it's his mission wherever the Spanish are, it is going to be Catholic. Okay, and so he is extremely motivated to spread Catholicism. He fought against the Dutch to make sure that those Protestants didn't get away, even though he kind of loses that. He will marry into the monarchy in England after Henry VIII splits from the Roman Catholic Church and forms the Anglican Church. After he dies, Henry VIII's very Catholic daughter becomes queen. Philip marries into that to try to bring back Catholicism into England. Unsuccessful there as well. That's another story for a different day. So, just want you to be aware of this Habsburg family, because this motive to restore Catholicism, it's in their blood. Okay, Ferdinand and Ferdinand's descendants are going to do it, which is going to start our 30 Years' War, and Philip tries like heck to do it anywhere the Spanish are involved. All right. Yep, I just should have ended that. Okay, when we speak of the Holy Roman Empire, this is where we're talking. What we know today as Germany, Austria, Czech Republic, basically the center part of it. Okay, the political makeup of the Holy Roman Empire is really kind of important to understand. It is an empire of hundreds of small little kingdoms, right? You can see kind of in this map the multi-different colors. Each one of these areas has its own German prince. These German princes then get together and choose an emperor. The Habsburgs had a long run and will continue to have a long run. They just kind of coming back to them. They emerge out of what we would know as Austria, so sometimes you'll hear them referred to as Austrian Habsburgs, but this is a very powerful area, okay? But because of this political makeup of the Holy Roman Empire, we get a sense, and you should have observed, this is why Lutheranism and Protestantism was so attractive. These German princes are going to start. Yes, I appreciate the theological teachings of Martin Luther, but I also appreciate the fact that I, thanks to the Peace of Augsburg, am now even more politically in charge of my area, right? So it's a way to sever ties to Rome. It's a way to sever some ties from the Holy Roman Emperor as well. So when this 30 Years' War breaks out, the significance and the consequences of this war are going to be great. And they probably would not have been had the political makeup of this empire been different. Okay? So it's just, you kind of need to understand, that's that contextualization. We got to kind of understand a little bit about how the Holy Roman Empire is composed. Okay, so let's get through this war as quickly and painlessly as possible. Okay? So, when we speak of the 30 Years' War, right, it's some key characteristics that we should know. The Holy Roman Empire, as I just said, that was the battleground. At the beginning, this very much was a religious war. It was a Habsburg desire to unify the Holy Roman Empire and then perhaps all of Europe back to the Catholicism, right? So at the beginning, it's going to be our Catholics versus the Protestants. It's going to be Catholics versus Lutherans and Calvinists. The Calvinists are definitely much more in play now than they were during Martin Luther's time and the reason that brought us the Peace of Augsburg. By the time this war is over, in about 30 years, it's a full-fledged political war. Now it's going to be between powerful families. We're still looking to make sure that we are going to try to curb the power of the Spanish and the German Habsburgs, but now it's that French Bourbon dynasty. Our Bourbon dynasty begins with who? Very good. Henry of Navarre, Henry IV, that Bourbon noble that marries into the Valois family and who famously may or may not have said Paris is worth a mass, but begins the Bourbon dynasty. As we will see in our next unit, when we kind of bring it all back together, like this dynasty becomes extremely wealthy and extremely powerful. So the Bourbons are going to dominate. Okay, so beginning of the war, Catholics versus Protestants. By the end of the war, Bourbons versus the Habsburgs. Okay, when it's all said and done, a very critically important treaty or peace settlement will come out. It's known as the Treaty of Westphalia. You will also see it referred to as the Peace of Westphalia. Okay, that's going to be our turning point in European history, this Peace of Westphalia. Okay, the 30 Years' Wars is broken down into 4 phases. Now, do I expect you to have these 4 phases memorized? Not necessarily. I think you want to be comfortable with them, but more importantly, I want you to know when the changes are occurring. What happens, all right, is this a Catholic win? Is this a little bit of a Protestant win? But more importantly, at what phase does it start to switch from a religious war to a political war? That's more important, right? To know the phases, to see and recognize the phases, is going to help you in that process as well. Okay, so our first phase is known as the Bohemian Phase. What happens? We get the new Habsburg, Ferdinand, who becomes the new prince, not quite the Holy Roman Emperor yet. He becomes the new prince, becomes the new king of Bohemia, right? He is extremely Catholic. The Bohemians, leaning more Protestant, Calvinism is really thriving in Bohemia. And so when Ferdinand comes in, they fear that they are going to lose this kind of momentum that they have. So they hate it. Okay? Ferdinand comes in and he starts issuing some changes, right? Really trying to establish himself and maybe establish Catholicism as the dominant religion. So the Protestants are extremely upset about that. Okay, Ferdinand has some of his people write an angrily worded letter. Now, bad things happen with angrily worded letters sometimes. The Protestant leaders, again, powerful families, very similar to what we talked about in France, they're a little upset by these letters. So they summon Ferdinand's appointees, right? We need to hash this out. Let's have a meeting. Okay, so the Catholics, representatives of Ferdinand, said, yeah, I'll come to a meeting. Where's this meeting? Well, we're going to meet up on the 3rd floor. Okay, another life lesson. If somebody who is very angry at you wants to have a meeting, you should strongly encourage that this meeting happen on the 1st floor. If they say we're going up to the 3rd floor, maybe some red flags should raise up, all right? So throughout the course of this meeting, the Protestants get very angry. And they're like, enough of your angrily worded letters. We're going to send Ferdinand a message. So they defenestrate Ferdinand's representatives. What a fantastic word. Defenestrate. It literally means to throw out a window. So we get the infamous defenestration of Prague in May of 1618. And I've got very lifelike images of that, right? So out go the Catholics, right? They are defenestrated. I just love it. Like, it literally means to throw out a window. So, throughout this course of the defenestration, here's the window. Come on, where'd you go? Yeah, right up there in the third story. Like, don't go to the third story for a meeting. So this is really where many historians feel like this is when the war started. Now, the gentlemen, there were 3 gentlemen who were defenestrated. They survived. Now, depending on if you're Catholic or you're Protestant, you have a different interpretation of how and why they survived. If you're Protestants, then you think, well, the only reason they survived is because there was this huge pile of cow manure and horse manure below the window. And so they landed in it and they survived. And to be honest with you, that's where Catholics belong. They survived because they landed in a big pile of shaving cream or whatever. Okay? They got what they deserved. Catholics believe that angels appeared. And when they were defenestrated, the angels came and guided them down into a nice, soft landing of shaving cream. And so then they survived. So you have 2 different interpretations of what's happening there. Regardless, Ferdinand is extremely angry. Okay? Ferdinand is driven out of Bohemia. The Protestants, they pick their own new king. They're like, screw you, Ferdinand. We're picking Frederick because, why would we pick Steve? Because that would be too hard to understand because, Ferdinand and Frederick, let's just make their names almost exactly the same and watch Mr. Sherman's head explode. Don't worry about the names quite yet. Ferdinand's out of Bohemia, but then Ferdinand becomes the Holy Roman Emperor. And so now he's like, all right, it is going to be on like Donkey Kong right now because now I'm the Holy Roman Emperor. I got the better hat. Not the school is the Popa hat, but I got the hat. So Ferdinand, as Holy Roman Emperor, rallies the Catholics, right? Come on, German princes that are Catholics. Let's teach these Protestants a lesson, okay? There were many who feared, right, that the Catholics were going to lose power, and then there were many Protestants that in the Holy Roman Empire that feel like they would lose power, right? So, we've got this conflict. Ferdinand, in his desire to restore Catholicism, rallies the troops and our war begins, okay? At the end of this phase, what do we need to know? It's going really well for Ferdinand, okay? Catholics win the first phase, the Bohemian Phase, okay? And so they are driving the Protestants up north, okay? So if we're keeping score, Catholics 1, Protestants 0. We move, defenestration, that's awesome. There's our Bohemian Phase, kind of happens down in this area. You can see the defenestration of Prague. So this is our major area of our conflict, and then slowly but surely we're going to drive these Protestants north. So this war is going to progress north. Now we move into the Dutch phase. Okay? Wait a minute. The Dutch? I thought we were talking about the Germans. The Dutch, at this time, Denmark, heavily Lutheran. Okay? They take a look at what the Catholics are doing. They say, ooh, I thought, my poor Lutheran brothers, I thought they had that peace of Augsburg. I thought they had a little religious toleration. The emperor seems to be going back on that. I think that's totally something worth fighting for. So, the king of Denmark, oh my God, another king, Christian the Fourth, what kind of name is that, right? Like, we'll set this up, we change his name to Protestant Christian the Fourth. No, Christian the Fourth is the king of Denmark. He steps in. Okay, he's going to rally his troops, and he is going to come to the aid of his Protestant brothers within the Holy Roman Empire and bring his money and his influence into the war. Okay, seems like it could tip the scale a little bit, but Ferdinand responds and says, I got a man that can kick Protestant butt. Okay, side note about Christian. He is totally going to publicly say, I'm doing this for my Lutheran brothers. But he, as the king of Denmark, also has a political and economic motive. He very much doesn't want this strong Habsburg family to restore the Holy Roman Empire under Catholicism, under Habsburg power. I kind of like having these neighbors within the Holy Roman Empire. I like having Lutheran brothers, right? I kind of like this political makeup where not one area is too powerful. If the Habsburgs become too powerful, then perhaps Denmark will lose some political influence, and most importantly, maybe they are going to lose the superiority that they have in that Baltic area. Okay, if I go back to the map, when we speak of the Baltic Sea, here's Denmark sticking up there, right? We speak of the Baltic, we're talking about these trade routes up in this area, right? Denmark is dominating up here. They fear if the Habsburgs come up, they are going to lose that economic and political domination that they have. Okay? So, now we're pulling in other countries. Okay? And now we have Protestant, we have Lutherans and Calvinists fighting with each other against these Catholics coming from the south, trying to restore Catholicism. Ferdinand kind of has like an ace up his sleeve. This man enters our conversation called Albert von Wallenstein. I just like to say his name like that because he was a military German leader. Wallenstein! He is kind of a ruthless genius. You read in your book, you should have some good notes on it, how he dramatically changes how we fight. We'll come back to him here in a second. Bottom line is, very good general, totally winning victories, pushing the Lutherans and the Protestant, and now the Dutch out of it, right? Ferdinand is getting so many victories that he gets cocky and he issues this Edict of Restitution. This basically sends the message to all of the Holy Roman Empire. I don't care what you got in the Peace of Augsburg. Any land that the Catholic Church lost, I'm taking back under Habsburg control. This is that desire to unify all lands under Catholicism, right? His Catholicism. It also basically nullifies any sense of religious tolerance, right? Calvinists have been claiming they want a little bit piece of that, a piece of Augsburg as well, like no Calvinists. Some Lutherans I'm going to continue to allow because, you know, you did get that in the Peace of Augsburg, but I'm going to take your lands, but we're going to allow some religious tolerance a little bit, okay? As the war progresses, Wallenstein, starting to become very, very wealthy, very, very powerful. German princes see him now, the man that there's helping them win wars. Even Catholic German princes are now looking at Wallenstein, and we're like, ooh, he's getting a little bit too big for his britches, right? So they put a lot of pressure on Ferdinand after these victories. Ferdinand's like, okay, Wally, back off a little bit. Wally, right? And so thus ends our Dutch phase. What you need to know? Catholic victory number 2. Okay, so if we're keeping score at home, Catholics 2, Protestants nothing. Okay, it's starting to even out a little bit. What do you know about Mr. Wallenstein? Big thing, make sure you have this from your notes, right? Completely changes the way European armies will be paid. Up until this point, it was to the victor goes the spoils. You didn't pay your soldiers, but when you won a victory, you just allowed them to loot and take whatever they wanted. Now, he says, no, let's pay these soldiers ahead of time. Let's basically establish professional soldiers. And the people we're fighting for, you should pay up front. So these Catholic German princes, including Ferdinand, you got to put your money where your mouth is. You want me to fight for you, you got to start paying for us. Okay? This is what allows him to acquire a lot of wealth, and with wealth comes power. Now we move into our third phase, which is the Swedish phase. So now you get my Swedish accent. Our Swedish phase, Sweden, right? Like this is it. If you remember, I don't know if I told you, like if you guys come from Swedish ancestry, this is it. This is your 10 minutes of fame, right? We're going to talk about your famous leader, Gustavus Adolphus, and he's like the big Swedish king, and then he gets killed, and then we never really talk about the Sweden again, all right? Until when they give up when the Nazis jump out of the plane. Okay, so Swedish phase. This is really the phase where it starts to switch to more of a political war. Okay? Sweden, heavily Lutheran, very similar to Christian in Denmark. They are going to say, we're coming to the aid of our Lutheran brothers. The Peace of Augsburg established Lutheranism as a legal religion. We are here to help our Lutheran brothers within the Holy Roman Empire maintain that religious freedom. But in reality, we now truly do fear, if the Habsburgs have had success in these first two phases, if they were to unite the Holy Roman Empire under Habsburg rule, strong, powerful Catholic Habsburg rule, that's going to be politically and economically detrimental to Denmark, to Sweden, and now to France. Okay? So why you know it's starting to switch into a political war? Here comes France. France is a Catholic country. Henry of Navarre. Paris is worth a mass. Yeah, I know we have that Edict of Nantes, but Catholicism is our official religion. So, but now we are going to give some money, we're going to give some soldiers, we are going to give some support to these Protestants, Catholics helping Protestants fight other Catholics. That's starting to send a message that maybe theology isn't the primary motive here anymore. Okay? So in this phase, it's looking fairly good early on for our Lutherans, right? Or our Protestants, I'm sorry. Because remember, Calvinists are involved in this as well, right? Gustavus Adolphus, this very strong king, I got a slide on him coming up as well, really is the one that put Sweden onto the map through his reforms. And he's a little bit of a military genius. So he stops Ferdinand, right? Stops Wallenstein, or stops Ferdinand's advance, right? To the point where Ferdinand's like, uh-oh, I gotta bring Wallenstein back, right? So now Wallenstein comes back and stops this advance of the Lutherans, right? But we're starting to see maybe a little bit of a change in this war. It's not necessarily going great for the Catholics anymore, right? The war is starting to bog down. It's becoming even more and more violent. One of the reasons it becomes more and more violent, we need to take a little bit, is Gustavus Adolphus. This Swedish king, really considered for a king a military genius, completely changes the way we are going to fight. We're using these modern weapons. You have a key concept, right, that talked a little bit about how did technology change the way we fought. So now we have gunpowder. Gunpowder, we've got these, single shot muskets. They're not real accurate, but Gustavus Adolphus figured out, all right, if we start shooting or lining up in more like square or rectangles, we can have a constant barrage of shooting. Well, the problem with a musket, it's one shot and then you got to reload, and the reloading process takes time. So what Gustavus Adolphus introduces, that Napoleon, coming up in our next couple units, masters, is, right, we'll kind of form squares or rectangles. That first line shoots, steps to the side, the next one whose gun is already loaded steps up, and then the person who needs to reload kind of retreats back into the square, and so we're going to have a constant motion of shooting, right? It's going to be extremely destructive. It's not accurate, but it doesn't have to be totally accurate if it's going to be more and more shooting, okay? He also is the one to figure out if we can make smaller cannons. We had cannons, right? Everybody's got a cannon in their castle, but they were huge, and they were basically meant to defend your fort or your castle. Gustavus Adolphus says, we can make these smaller. We can put wheels on them. We can start moving them into the field. And so now all of a sudden we've got artillery into our battles. And that is going to completely change the way we fight as well. Now, he's not so much of a military genius that he couldn't avoid a shot. And so, very tragically, Gustavus Adolphus is killed in the Battle of Lutzen in 1632. The Swedes will try to continue to fight, but without their leader, their spirit kind of goes down. And so we're moving towards the end of this phase, right? Like maybe Ferdinand thought without Gustavus Adolphus, this is it. We're going to be the final push. But our Protestants and our German princes in the north, and now with the help of the French, the war continues, right? At this point, everybody's like, maybe we should ease up, okay? Ferdinand is even willing to do a little peace settlement. He says, all right, maybe I overstepped my bounds with that edict of restitution. I'll annul that. I'll let you have some of your lands back, right? These German, his own people are like, Wallenstein, we can't trust him. So he even had his top military advisor, his top general, the man who has been giving him victories, he had him assassinated. He literally ordered the assassination of his own guy, right, to appease these German princes. So even Ferdinand and the Habsburgs are now like, all right, we're pushing 20 some years into this war. Maybe it's becoming a little bit more destructive than we wanted. But we're not quite ready for peace yet. Okay, so peace still does not come. So the Swedish phase, we're not going to call it a full Protestant victory, but we're definitely not going to call it a Catholic victory, right? We're going to call it the switch, right? Like we're seeing this major shift now to a political war. Finally, our last phase. Phase. Our French phase, right? France and Sweden now switch roles. What does that mean? Now the French are leading the battles. And the Swedes will just giving you some money and will give you the support that you need. I don't know where that accent went. And so the French become really the leaders in this battle against the Habsburg, right? By the time we hit the French phase, religious issues are fairly insignificant, right? By 1635, this last 13 years of the war, it is a political war. It is now a war to keep the Habsburgs from gaining any more power and to perhaps establish the Bourbons as the powerful family. Okay? Once French money gets involved and once French troops get involved, and now we're going to see how many other nations are getting involved across England, across Europe, this is now an extremely catastrophic, significant war. This final phase is the most destructive. German towns were completely decimated, trade routes completely disrupted, crops destroyed. When you destroy your crops, and we're still fighting for 13 years, right? You can't feed your people. Now famine hits, right? From famine comes even more chaos. Like it is just now we got this war, and the ripple effects of it are dramatic across the Holy Roman Empire. In this phase alone, we're going to have over 8 million people dead. That's catastrophic. Okay. From 1618 in this these 30 years of war, right? We're seeing a dramatic decrease in this German population. I think your book even mentioned it and a couple other things that I have read. Historians can't give us an exact number, right? But the thing that all historians can agree on was it was catastrophic to the German population. Holy Roman Empire, we're not the German nation yet, but they're German people. So it's absolutely catastrophic. Okay? Add into that, now we're going to throw economic worries into it because the supply and demand routes have all been screwed up, and so we also have massive inflation. Okay? What I want you to note in here, sometimes perhaps when you study more European history, a lot of times that the 30 Years' War is oftentimes referred to as Europe's first continental war. Pretty much every nation in Europe or every kingdom or every political entity was somehow involved in this 30 Years' War. I came across this graph that I really like. And so you kind of look down to the left, you see all of these, the emperor, that would be Bohemia, that would be Ferdinand's area. And then you got some of these other major powerful areas within the Holy Roman Empire. Saxony, remember, Saxony is where Frederick the Wise, that's where Martin Luther's home was. And so you see all of these other ones. But Russia gets involved. The Netherlands are going to get involved. The Dutch They are involved almost the whole time. We talked a little bit about Denmark and our Dutch phase. Sweden, France, England, right? Even Transylvania is involved. Spain, always involved throughout this whole thing, trying to support their Habsburg. So this is really a full-fledged continental war. Okay, and you can kind of look on the colors there to see whose side they were on. All right, especially notice the ones that kind of flip in the middle. Right, Brandenburg. Whose side are you on there, buddy? Here's another graph, a visual thing that I think just kind of really drives home that loss of lives. Notice when we get up into this northern part up here in our final stage, that's where we're talking about is the most catastrophic. You know, over 50% of the population in these areas are going to be lost in the war. So 30 Years' War is extremely catastrophic. Okay, so wrap it up. The war itself, don't necessarily, like you notice, like I know I had you do one of the battles in your notes. That one didn't make it on there. As far as the war itself, you need to know extremely catastrophic, but then you kind of need to know those phases. Who's getting involved and why? Christian in that Dutch phase, Christian from Denmark, Gustavus Adolphus, they're going to publicly say they're doing it to help their Protestant brothers, but there's also political and economic motives. When the French get involved under Richelieu, it's not religious at all. It's totally political. It's totally meant to be a political war, right? So that's what you really need to understand. Right now, Wallenstein, Edict of Restitution, yeah, right? They all help us kind of understand the part of the war, or the significance of the war. The big thing you need to know, though, is this peace settlement. I would love to be able to tell you there was one key victory that led to it, but there wasn't. What we get at the end of the 30 years are everybody just tired. And we're like, we have to come up with an end to this. So this peace settlement is ugly. It takes forever, but eventually we're just like, this is what it is. Let's make this settlement. Let's end this war. So there are pretty significant political provisions, right? And I'll kind of sum it up a little bit. At the end of the Peace of Westphalia, at the end of the 30 Years' War, why, again, this is a big turning point. The Holy Roman Emperor is just not politically significant anymore. They're going to be there. It's figurehead only, right? That desire of having a united empire under one powerful Habsburg emperor, it's not reached, right? Each German prince is now basically free from any kind of control of the Holy Roman Empire. German kingdoms, these areas, they are now all independent. That will eventually lead to Brandenburg, Prussia, and then we'll start talking about Prussia as a nation. Austria, you're going to now start to refer and hear as these areas as their own independent nations, no longer really the Holy Roman Empire. The Dutch, you read a little bit about their battles with Philip II of Spain, right? They now become fully independent. So we're seeing new independent nations break out. France is going to get some land, very specifically this area of Alsace. That's going to be significant because this battle between Alsace, is it French, is it German, is it French, is it German, that's going to continue all the way into the 20th century. Okay? Sweden's going to get some lands back. Switzerland's totally independent. They'll build this Swiss Confederation, thus will always be independent and neutral. Okay? And then certain German territories, German kingdoms, get a little bit more land, right? So, big thing on this slide, what you need to know, Holy Roman Emperor, no longer significant. Holy Roman Empire basically doesn't exist anymore. The religious provisions. Oh yeah, remember we started this war because of religion. How is it going to end? Basically what we have is Calvinists are now brought into the Peace of Augsburg. Okay? So remember the Peace of Augsburg allowed the German princes to choose the religion of their land. Now Calvinism is in the mix. The ruler of each state gets to, again, continue to determine its official religion. But now, right, except for those heavily Catholic lands in the Habsburg, if this is a Lutheran land and Catholics want to practice there, you can stay. You can practice your Catholicism here. This is a Catholic land, and it's not in the Habsburg control, but it's up in the north. Lutherans and Calvinists, you get to practice in your areas. Okay? So basically what we have is religious toleration. Borderline, much more than ever, we're kind of pushing that religious freedom for certain groups. Anabaptists, no. Jews, no. Right? But Calvinists, Lutherans, Catholics, within certain areas, have the right to freely practice their religions. Okay? So, the religious connotations of the Peace of Westphalia kind of up the game from what the Peace of Augsburg did. There's a bunch of white dudes signing this treaty, okay? And there's our Europe a little bit at the end, and that's what it's going to kind of, our political makeup is going to look like. So, in the end, okay, this is why it's a turning point. At the end of this war, religion was no longer a major factor in making government political decisions. I've been setting that up for the last 2 videos, okay? The Pope's political influence is greatly reduced. They didn't even consult the Pope when they sat down to do this Peace of Westphalia, right? 50, 100 years prior to this, that would have been unheard of. Countries would have needed the Pope's approval to make any major decisions like this. Now we're just like, hey, take in a funny hat and stay in a room and just do what you want. Okay? The other hugely significant thing, the Bourbons. France. France is now the political power in Europe. Spanish Habsburgs, totally diminish in power. The German Habsburgs, completely removed from power. So this powerful Habsburg family, right? All of this money coming in from the New World, right? But between the loss of the Netherlands, between the loss in the 30 Years' War, the Habsburg family is seriously on the decline. And now the French dynasty, the Bourbons, they are the political power in Europe. Okay? Holy Roman Empire, Spain, and declines, just one other thing. Right? And now we're speaking more of religious toleration. Okay? Religion moved closer to becoming primarily a matter of personal conviction and individual choice rather than state policy. Okay? So that's it. That's the significance of this war. Okay? So, one of the things that absolutely confuses people, and we'll do this in class as well. When we speak in terms of religious wars, you need to know these 3 and need to know how they relate and how they are different. Okay? Can you do it? Do you understand these? Peace of Augsburg. Lutheranism is now legal within the Holy Roman Empire. German princes get to choose their religion. If I choose Lutheran and you are Catholic in my kingdom, I have to let you leave. Makes Lutheranism legal. Just Lutheranism, just Holy Roman Empire. Edict of Nantes, 1598. France, Nantes. This is the Calvinist desire to get their equivalent of the Peace of Augsburg. The Edict of Nantes kind of helps end the French wars of religion. It's not full legalized Calvinism, but Calvinists have the right to practice Calvinism within France. It is not religious freedom, right? It is, France is still a Catholic nation, but there's some religious toleration. You're allowed to do it. Move into the 30 Years' War, the Peace or Treaty of Westphalia, basically almost religious freedom for Protestant groups, but really sets the stage. Calvinists, Lutherans are now legal within the Holy Roman Empire, religion becoming more of an individual thing than a political state policy. Okay? So, if you can keep those square in your head And you'll like, if you can do it now, that's great. But the big test is, are you going to be able to do it in January and going to be able to do it in May? We'll keep coming back to it. Okay. So that's our 30 Years' War. Okay, it went a few minutes faster than the French Wars of Religion, but hopefully it helps put things together. If you've done the textbook reading, your textbook, I think, does a pretty good job on this. I added a few extra details, but just kind of understand how we can use this war to show, yes, how does a war start as a religious war, but finish as a complete political war. And that is the significance of 1648. We see this turning point in European history. Religion no longer state policy. Okay? All right. Hope you enjoyed.